I'm a talker, while my boyfriend's a workaholic. He tells me I'm annoying, deletes me from his contacts, and blocks my number. If I want to reach him, I have to submit a request 3 hours in advance, and once it's approved, I get 5 minutes of his time. This is my 99th request to go see the Northern Lights. I'm just waiting for him to reject it, so I can finally let this relationship go. But instead, the approval comes through. I spend an entire week putting together an itinerary and only ask him to book our flights. When I get to the airport, I receive a notification telling me to book my own ticket. I make excuses for him, tell myself he's busy with work. But after I land, I find him sitting with my best friend Becca Holloway, posing for one of those couples portraits that takes a full hour to finish. He sees me and frowns. So, I didn't get your ticket. What's the big deal? There were only 2 first-class seats left, and Becca has a bad back. She had to sit there. He says it like it's the most obvious thing in the world, then pushes the luggage beside him toward me. Grab these, will you? Becca hurt her wrist, so she can't lift anything. The moment he finishes talking, he reaches up and takes out his hearing aid with practiced ease, cutting me off before I can say a word. Something in me just gives out. I take the sticky notes from my pocket and toss them in the trash. I plan to write down everything I want to say on them so I won't waste his time. Now I don't need them anymore. Compliments from strangers followed them everywhere. None of these people realized that the perfect couple they were admiring was my boyfriend and my best friend, while I trailed behind them, dragging my luggage like some kind of afterthought. Becca Holloway glanced back at me and gave Nolan Keller a light tap on the shoulder, her tone teasing. Nolan, slow down a little. Fiona can barely keep up. Nolan stopped, his expression softening. Come on, give me some of those. They're too heavy for you. Becca looked pleased. It was always like this. The last time I had a 102-degree fever, I called him from a different number. The moment he heard my voice, he cut me off and told me to submit a request first. The time before that, I couldn't take it anymore and stormed into his office to have it out with him. He just took out his hearing aid. In that moment, all the hurt just caught in my throat. It wasn't until Becca called him later and talked him down that he finally bothered to comfort me. Fine, I hear you. It won't happen again. But it never changed. The car arrived. They climbed into the back seat and pulled the door shut behind them. Fiona, what are you standing there for? You probably didn't sleep well on the plane. Sit up front and get some rest. Nolan pulled a sleep mask out of his bag and held it out to me. I looked at it, and something small and warm stirred in my chest. Maybe he did still care, even a little. But before I could reach for it, Becca let out a small gasp, and he yanked his hand back. The sleep mask tumbled to my feet. What's wrong? Is your back acting up? His eyes went soft with worry as he pressed his palm gently against her lower back, his touch steady and practiced. The heater was running, but a chill crept through me anyway. My mind drifted to 2 days ago. I'd spent the entire week working on the itinerary, and my back was killing me. I went back and forth for a long time before I finally asked him to rub it. He frowned and tossed his papers onto the desk. Fiona Cole, who do you think you are, some kind of princess? What? Do you need me to hire someone to take care of you? I picked up the sleep mask without a word, put it on, and closed my eyes. It blocked out the glare of the sun, but it couldn't block out the voices drifting from the back seat. Nolan kept his voice low as he went over the plans with Becca. You get cold easily, so I packed hand warmers for you. I already adjusted the camera settings, so we'll get great shots. The observation point is up on the mountain. I brought a thick blanket, so you can sit on it while you watch the lights. He'd thought of everything, down to the last detail. But when I asked him before we left if there was anywhere he wanted to go, he told me he didn't care about that stuff, and to just handle it. Behind the mask, my eyes still stung. I quietly unlocked my phone and deleted the request template. There was no point holding on to something useless. At the hotel, I gave my information to the front desk. The receptionist checked the booking, then looked at the 3 of us with a polite smile. Ma'am, you only reserved 1 room with 2 beds. Would you like to book a second room as well? I glanced back at Becca, gesturing for her to hand over her ID. But Nolan had his arm around her, as if the answer should be obvious. Becca's not feeling well. I'll take the double with her, so I can keep an eye on her. You can get your own room. My grip on the suitcase handle tightened until my knuckles went white. Nolan, I'm your girlfriend. A flicker of impatience crossed his face. Fiona, she's your best friend. When did you get so petty? This room has a better view and softer beds. She'll be more comfortable in it. You're tough. You've slept on a plywood cot before. A single room isn't going to kill you. Every word made it sound like I was the one being unreasonable. He took the key card from the front desk and walked toward the elevator without looking back. Becca tugged gently at his sleeve, looking faintly disapproving. Nolan, you can't talk to Fiona like that. but he just ruffled the back of her hair. It's fine. Once you're well rested, we'll all have a better time. When he turned to look at me, every trace of warmth vanished from his face. If you can't figure that out, stay here and think about it. The two of them walked off together, and I stood there alone. During the years Nolan was getting his business off the ground, I lived with him in a rental barely bigger than a parking space. That plywood cot was the best piece of furniture we owned, and now he was throwing it in my face. I'd lost count of how many times he'd left me to deal with everything on my own. It hadn't always been like this. He used to say that the silent treatment was the fastest way to kill a relationship, that communication was what mattered most. A tissue appeared in front of me. I looked up and met the worried eyes of a receptionist, and only then did I realize my cheeks were soaked with tears. That night, a knock came at my door. "Fiona, it's me." I got up and opened it. Nolan stood there holding a hot water bottle against his chest. "You didn't look good today. Your period's probably coming." The warm light from the hallway softened his features, and for a second, it almost felt like he loved me. He told me to lie down and pressed his hand against my stomach, rubbing gently. The warmth of his palm made me want to lean into it just for a little longer. "Fiona, her back injury was my fault. That's why I've been looking after her more. Don't be jealous. And the room thing, I only took the double because you're a light sleeper. I work late, and I'd just keep you up." Everything he said sounded so considerate, like it was all for my sake. The walls I'd just started building were already beginning to crack. The word "okay" sat right on the tip of my tongue. Then his next sentence knocked it right back down. "Get some sleep early tonight. That way you can head out in the morning to pick up pastries from Bellamy's. The line takes a few hours, and I don't want Becca waiting around hungry." His hand kept moving in the same slow circles, but the warmth against my skin suddenly felt like nothing at all. So that was why he came. I pulled away from his hand and quietly shifted to the other side of the bed. He paused for a moment but kept going. "Make sure you don't get anything too heavy. Becca's been trying to watch her weight. And nothing too sweet either. It hurts her teeth." I lay there and listened. Since Becca came into the picture, this was the most he'd said to me at one time. My pillow was wet with tears. A crack of thunder split the air outside. I grabbed the sheets beneath me on instinct, my whole body shaking. At the first rumble, Nolan was already on his feet and heading for the door. "It's storming. Becca doesn't know her way around here. I should go be with her." Just as his hand reached the door, I threw myself at him and buried my face in his chest. "Nolan, can you stay with me tonight? Just tonight. That's all I'm asking." Years ago, Dad brought his mistress into our home. Mom jumped from the roof on a night just like this, thunder and pouring rain. I was on my knees in the courtyard, watching her fall right in front of me. The rain was so heavy, but I could still see the red, bright and vivid, spreading across the ground. Nolan's hand froze on the door handle. He rarely saw me like this. Even when we fought, I mostly just swallowed it down and cried quietly. "Okay, I'll stay." He looked down and noticed I wasn't wearing slippers, then let out a soft sigh. He slid one hand under my knees and carried me to the bed. But a second later, his phone rang, and I recognized the ringtone he'd set for her. "Nolan, why aren't you in your room?" "I'm so scared." "Don't be scared. I'm coming right now." His sleeve brushed past my fingertips, and the door slammed shut behind him. The storm didn't let up all night. In the morning, a sharp knock came at my door. "Fiona, open up." I dragged myself out of bed, my head still foggy. When I opened the door, a small part of me hoped he'd come because he was worried about me, that he'd rushed over first thing to make sure I was all right. "I called you over 10 times. Why didn't you pick up? I told you last night to go get breakfast for Becca. She's already awake," and the rest of his words died when he got a good look at my face, drained of all color. Something like guilt flickered across his expression, but it lasted less than a second. Becca came down the hall, one hand braced against the wall, slightly hunched over. "Nolan, my stomach hurts." He was at her side immediately, then turned to me. "Go get Becca some breakfast, and stop by a pharmacy for something for her stomach." It was still raining outside, and none of us had an umbrella. Becca shook her head lightly, trying to stop him. "Nolan, just order delivery." His tone dropped, harder than usual. "In this weather, who knows how long that would take. It'll be faster, if Fiona goes." Guilt flickered across Becca's face, but she didn't argue. I couldn't help thinking about the year after Mom died. I refused to talk to anyone and just sat in my room, staring at the walls. Becca was the one who showed up every few days with coffee and cakes, spending entire days sitting with me. And back when I was helping Nolan build his company, I wore the same clothes until they fell apart and patched them back together. Becca gave me every cent of her savings and made Nolan swear he'd treat me right for the rest of his life. I used to think I had everything, the perfect friendship and the perfect love. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being a priority to Nolan, and Becca became the only one who mattered to him. Something bitter twisted in my chest, but I pushed it down. Okay, I'll go now. Compared to everything she'd done for me, I was just picking up breakfast and some medicine. Refusing would only make me look petty. I bought an umbrella, but the rain was coming down so hard it barely helped. By the time I made it back to the hotel, my pants were soaked through, and my stomach was cramping with a dull, heavy ache. But the room was empty. They were already gone. I dialed Nolan's number. The automated message reminded me that I'd been blocked a long time ago. With no other choice, I called Becca instead. Her voice came through with a note of surprise. "Oh, Fiona, we forgot to tell you. Nolan and I already went out to eat." By the time I rushed over, the table was nothing but picked over scraps and cold plates. Nolan saw me and stood up. Something in my chest loosened, thinking maybe he was going to ask if I was cold or why I'd taken so long. Instead, he walked straight past me and grabbed the rain-soaked plastic bag from my hand. His brow creased. "If you didn't want to get the medicine, you could have just said so instead of dragging your feet about it. What if it got damp and lost its potency?" One sentence, and whatever I'd just been hoping for felt laughable. Becca gave him a shove and moved to stand beside me. "Nolan, what's wrong with you?" "She's drenched." Nolan looked me up and down, then softened slightly.
"Fine.
"You must be hungry. Go ahead and eat." But the moment I took the menu, my heart sank. I glanced around at the restaurant's interior and realized this was a seafood restaurant. I was severely allergic to seafood. I closed my eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. "Nolan, I told you I'm allergic to seafood." A flash of embarrassment crossed his face, like it was only now coming back to him. Seafood used to never appear at our table. Then his gaze landed on the breakfast I'd bought, and his eyes lit up. "Perfect. Just eat that." I looked down at the pastries inside the bag. The paper packaging had soaked through in the rain, and the pastries were bloated with moisture. I could smell the damp from where I stood. And just minutes ago, he'd been scolding me for not keeping Becca's medicine dry. When I didn't respond, disappointment settled over his face. "You won't eat the seafood, and now you won't eat this either. You used to share stale bread with me back in that rental, and you never complained once. When did you get so picky? What, do you want us to find another restaurant and sit around waiting for you?" I stared at him as if I were looking at a stranger. So those years in the rental had given him the impression that that was all I deserved. Mom had left me money when she died, enough that I never would have had to worry. But I gave every last cent of it to Nolan as startup capital. I didn't argue. The light in my eyes just quietly went out. The fever that came was no surprise. What did surprise me was waking up to find Nolan sitting beside me. He had a damp cloth in his hand and was wiping my forehead over and over. When he saw my eyes open, there was reproach in his eyes, but for the first time it came from a place of worry. "You couldn't even bother drying your hair when you got back. And now look, you're the one who has to suffer through it." I studied his face. Honestly, I couldn't make sense of him anymore. "Nolan, what am I to you?" But before he could answer, Becca's voice rang out from the hall. "Nolan, we need to head out for the Northern Lights. If we miss it, who knows when the next chance will be." He stood up, and his eyes lingered on me for a moment, something uncertain flickering there. But he still grabbed his coat and left, tossing back one last thing. "Your medicine's on the nightstand. Don't forget to take it on time." I watched them leave, and somehow it didn't really matter whether he'd heard my question or not. I got up and started packing my bags. Then I booked a flight home. The fever didn't break until the plane was at 20,000 feet. Sitting in coach, sandwiched between a sleeping businessman and the engine's low vibration, I stared at the back of the seat in front of me.
For the first time
in 4 years, my mind was entirely quiet. When you spend years living in a state of constant emotional panic, walking on eggshells around someone who treats your presence like an eviction notice, the absence of that anxiety feels almost like a physical weight lifted from your chest. I pulled out my phone, switched off airplane mode for a brief second to access my offline notes, and opened my banking app. When my mother died 6 years ago, she left me her life insurance policy and the payout from the sale of her small embroidery shop. It was
$52,000.
When Nolan started his software firm, Keller Systems, he didn't have a credit score, a cosigner, or a single investor willing to look at him. I gave him every single cent. We didn't hire a high-priced lawyer back. Then, we wrote out a simple contract at our cramped kitchen table over instant noodles. 30% equity in exchange for seed capital, with a clause that allowed the capital to be converted into a personal debt-bearing interest if the business restructured. Over the years, as the company grew and Nolan began wearing tailored suits, he gradually stopped mentioning that paper. He treated the company as entirely his own, referencing my early contribution as that small loan Fiona helped me
With.
I closed the app, took out the SIM card from my phone, snapped it in half, and dropped the pieces into the empty coffee cup on my tray table. When the flight landed, I didn't go back to the high-rise apartment Nolan and I
Shared.
Instead, I called Mr. Harrison, my mother's former estate lawyer, a quiet, sharp-eyed man who had tried to warn me for years ago about mixing love and capital. Fiona, Mr. Harrison said, leaning back in his leather chair as I sat across from him in his downtown office. He looked at the original signed agreement I laid on his desk, its edges slightly yellowed. I was wondering when you were going to bring this to me. Is it valid? I asked. My voice didn't tremble. That surprised even me. Valid? It's airtight, Mr. Harrison said, scanning the document through his
Spectacle.
Nolan Keller signed this in front of a notary. He needed the capital to secure his first server farm. It explicitly states that your 30% equity cannot be diluted without your written consent.
Keller Systems is
Preparing for its Series B round of funding next month, isn't it? They're valued at roughly $40 million. I don't want his company, I said quietly. I want my money back with the compounded interest specified in Section 4, and I want my name completely scrubbed from his life. Mr. Harrison looked at me over his glasses, his expression softening.
he.
Doesn't know you're doing this. He thinks I'm still at the hotel in Iceland, waiting for him to finish looking at the sky. Up on the snow-covered mountain 3,000 miles away, the northern lights swept across the sky in violent, beautiful curtains of green and violet. Nolan stood by the edge of the observation platform, his heavy coat wrapped tightly around him. Beside him, Becca leaned against his shoulder, shivering slightly despite the 3 layers of wool he had wrapped around her. It's breathtaking, Nolan, Becca whispered, holding up her phone to take a
Picture.
I'm so glad we came. Nolan didn't look at the sky. He kept checking his watch. It had been 4 hours since they left the hotel. By now, Fiona's fever should have come down. She should have taken the medicine he pointed out on the
Nightstand.
Usually, after a fight or after he ignored her, she would send a flurry of messages from a new temporary number or submit another request through his secretary just to explain herself. He unblocked her number on his phone, expecting the screen to immediately fill with missed calls and long, rambling text paragraphs apologizing for being petty about the seafood restaurant. The screen remained blank. Nolan. Becca touched his arm, her voice soft and fragile. Is something wrong? My back is starting to throb a little again. Nothing, Nolan said, a slight frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. Let's head back. It's getting late, and Fiona's probably sulking in her room. When they arrived back at the hotel, Nolan walked down the carpeted hallway toward Fiona's single room. He pulled out the spare key card he had requested from the front desk, swiped it, and pushed the door open. Fiona, he said, keeping his tone firm, ready to cut off whatever emotional display she was about to make. I brought you some soup from the lodge down the
Road.
You need to stop making these. The room was silent. The bed was neatly made, the white duvet pulled tight without a single wrinkle. The nightstand was empty. The fever medication he had left remained untouched, neatly aligned beside an empty glass of water. Her luggage was gone. The closet.
Door hung open, revealing empty hangers.
Nolan stood in the doorway, the hot plastic container of soup suddenly feeling heavy in his hand. He walked over to the desk, expecting a note, a tear-stained letter detailing her grievances, like the ones she used to leave on his keyboard when they were younger. There was nothing, just the hotel information pamphlet and a clean, empty glass. Becca appeared at the door, clutching her cardigan around her shoulders.
Is she
not here? Did she go out to eat by herself? She checked out, Nolan said, his voice flat. He turned around, staring at the empty room. Well, Becca hesitated, looking down. She always had a bit of a temper, didn't she? Remember when we were in college and she ignored you for 2 days? Because you forgot her birthday? She'll come home once she realizes how expensive a last-minute flight back to the States is. Nolan pulled out his phone again. He dialed her primary number. The party you are trying to reach is unavailable. He opened his email, expecting a lengthy essay in his inbox. Nothing. A strange, Unfamiliar coldness settled in the pit of his stomach, sharper than the Arctic wind outside. "She's just trying to get my attention," Nolan muttered, though it sounded more like he was convincing himself. "She knows I have the preliminary investor meeting on Thursday. She's doing this on purpose." 2 days later, Nolan unlocked the front door of his luxury penthouse apartment, overlooking the city downtown. "Fiona?" he called out as he stepped into the foyer, tossing his leather briefcase onto the entry table. "I'm back. We need to talk about your behavior in Iceland." Silence greeted him. He walked into the open-concept living room. The apartment felt vast, cold, and, strangely, echoes-heavy. It took him a full 10 seconds to realize why. The oil painting of the coast, the one Fiona's mother had painted before she died, was gone from the main wall, leaving behind a pristine rectangle of lighter paint. The bookshelf in the corner, usually overflowing with her dog-eared novels and art history textbooks, was completely bare. The pair of velvet armchairs she had bought at a local antique store had been removed. He rushed to the master bedroom. Her side of the walk-in closet was entirely stripped clean. Not a single hanger was left on the rack. Her vanity table, usually cluttered with skincare bottles and hair clips, was wiped down, spotless. On the bare marble surface sat a single, small silver key, the key to the apartment building's lower storage unit. Nolan pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly as he called his secretary, Sarah. "Sarah," he snapped the moment she picked up. "Has Fiona submitted any requests through the portal today?" "No, Mr. Keller," Sarah answered, sounding confused. "Miss Cole hasn't contacted the office at all this week. Actually, I was going to ask you, did she come by the corporate office while I was away?"
No, sir.
"But, Mr. Keller, there is a legal representative from Harrison and Associates waiting in your office right now. They served us with a formal notice 2 hours ago." Nolan's grip on his phone tightened. Legal notice for what? Did she lodge a domestic complaint?
No, sir.
It's a financial asset freeze and a demand for equity redemption. They've flagged our Series B funding filing. Nolan's mind stalled. What? Her legal counsel claims she holds 30% founder equity under an undiluted agreement from 4 years ago, or in the alternative is demanding an immediate lump sum repayment of seed principal plus interest, totaling $6.2 million, payable within 14 business days. Nolan let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "That's ridiculous. That paper was a joke we wrote when we were broke. She doesn't have a lawyer for this.
She
Doesn't even know how to file a corporate claim. The firm representing her is Harrison and Associates, Mr. Keller. They're very thorough. The lead partner said if you attempt to sign the Series B paperwork on Thursday without clearing her title, they will file an injunction in federal
court."
Nolan hung up without another word. He stood in the middle of the quiet, empty bedroom, surrounded by the faint scent of her lingering perfume, which was rapidly fading into the sterile smell of the air conditioner. He immediately pulled up his messaging app, typing furiously, "Fiona, what kind of game are you playing? You're jeopardizing my company's entire future over a ruined trip?"
"Call me right now."
Message failed to deliver. He stared at the red exclamation mark on his screen. She hadn't just blocked his number. She had terminated her line altogether. While Nolan was pacing through his empty apartment, I was sitting in a sunlit bakery 3 miles away, sipping a hot cup of black coffee. For the first time in 4 years, my morning hadn't started with setting an alarm for 5:30 a.m. to prepare Nolan's low-sodium breakfast, nor had it involved checking his calendar to ensure his shirts were picked up from the dry cleaner. Across the table sat Mark Vance, a commercial real estate agent I had hired 2 days ago. He slid a folder across the table toward me. "The lease on the old studio on 4th Street cleared," Mark said with a warm smile. "It has high ceilings, fantastic natural light, and the landlord was thrilled to hear someone wants to reopen it as an art conservation and framing
shop."
"Your mother used to run her business there, right?" "She did," I said, tracing the edge of the lease agreement with my thumb. 30 years ago. It needs some work. The floors need sanding, and the walls need a fresh coat of paint." "I have time," I said. "And for the first time in a long time, I have energy." My phone, a new device with a new number known only to Mr. Harrison, the bank, and my agent, rang on the table. I picked it up. "Fiona," Mr. Harrison's calm voice filled the line. "Nolan Keller's legal team just reached out. They're offering a settlement of $500,000 to close the matter quietly. They claim the original seed document was an informal agreement. Tell them no, I replied smoothly. We stick to the contract terms. 6.2 million, or 30% of Keller Systems' current equity valuation prior to the Series B round. He's panicking, Fiona. His lead investors won't transfer the funds until the ownership structure is clean. He called my office 3 times in the last hour, demanding to speak with you directly. Did you give him my number? Of course not, Mr. Harrison said. I told him you are currently unavailable, and that any further communications regarding this matter must be submitted in writing to our firm, allowing a 72-hour review window. I smiled softly into the coffee cup. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. That sounds like a very fair timeline. A week passed. Nolan's world, which had always run with the mechanical precision of a well-coded algorithm, was beginning to fray at the edges. Without Fiona at the apartment, things simply stopped working.
He couldn't find
His custom cufflinks for the annual tech gala. They had been stored in an unlabeled velvet box that Fiona usually handed to him. The refrigerator was filled with takeout containers provided by Becca, who had moved into the guest room to help him get through this stressful time. But Becca didn't know how Nolan liked his coffee. She made it too sweet, leaving sticky rings on his mahogany dining table. She didn't know that his hearing aid needed its battery compartment cleaned with a specialized brush every Tuesday night, nor did she know how to organize his dry cleaning by color and fabric.
Wait.
More than that, Becca was constantly present. Nolan, my back is acting up again. Becca whimpered softly from the sofa on Wednesday evening, holding a hot pack against her waist. Can you come rub it for a minute? The noise from your laptop is giving me a headache. Nolan sat at the dining table, surrounded by legal papers, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He looked up at Becca. For 4 years, whenever Becca complained of an injury or illness, Nolan had rushed to her side, viewing her as a fragile flower that required his protection, a sharp contrast to Fiona, whom he had always viewed as self-sufficient, tough, and capable of enduring anything. But now, looking at Becca lying on his couch, complaining for the 3rd time, that evening while his company faced a devastating lawsuit, a prickle of irritation spiked behind his eyes. Becca, Nolan said, his voice clipped. I'm reviewing court documents that could destroy my company's valuation by 30%.
Can you take a
painkiller? Becca froze, her mouth opening slightly in shock. Nolan,
I came here to support you.
You've never talked to me like that. I'm busy, he snapped, running a hand through his unwashed hair. I have to find Fiona. Why are you so obsessed with her right now? Becca's voice rose, losing its usual airy, delicate quality. She's doing this out of malice. She's trying to ruin your life because she didn't get a first-class seat on a plane.
She's
selfish, Nolan. Nolan stared at Becca. 4 days ago, he would have agreed. But over the last 48 hours, while digging through his old financial files to find proof against her claim, he had found something else. In the bottom drawer of his home office desk, tucked inside an old tax folder. From 5 years ago, he had found a small, faded notebook. It was Fiona's expense diary from the early days of Keller Systems. Page after page was filled with her neat, precise handwriting. March 12th, sold mom's gold necklace. $1,200. Paid server hosting bill for Nolan. April 4th, skipped dinner. Saved $15. Added to Nolan's suit fund for his first investor meeting. August 19th, Nolan was awake all night stressing about the beta
launch.
Bought him a warm heating pad. Ate toast for lunch. And attached to the very back of the notebook were 98 physical request forms, the ones he had forced her to submit whenever she wanted to speak to him. After he instituted his productivity protocol, he opened the stack. He had never actually read them back then. His secretary had simply filed them away or flagged them as non-urgent. Request number 12. Nolan, your lunch is in the fridge. Please don't forget to eat. Request number 45. Nolan, the doctor says your hearing loss in the left ear might stabilize if you sleep 8 hours. Please come home early tonight. Request number 88. Nolan, my back has been hurting really badly from working 2 jobs to cover our grocery bill. When you have 5 minutes, could you just sit with me? Nolan's hands trembled as he turned the pages. 98 requests. Every single one of them had been marked with his own red stamp. Rejected, busy. And then there was the 99th request, the one for the trip to see the northern
lights.
The one he had approved not out of love, but because Becca had mentioned offhandedly, that she had always wanted to see the Arctic sky. Nolan suddenly felt sick to his stomach. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. Nolan, where are you going? Becca asked, standing up from the couch, her back suddenly looking completely fine. Out, Nolan said, grabbing his coat. It's 11 o'clock at night. You can't just leave me here. You have your own apartment, Becca, Nolan said, his voice icy calm. I think it's time you went back to it. The next morning, the rain was coming down in heavy, gray sheets over the city. The exact kind of rain that had fallen 6 years ago on the night Fiona's mother died. Nolan drove through the streets, stopping at every place he thought Fiona might
be.
Her old college campus, her favorite coffee shops, the small park near the library. She wasn't at any of them. Finally, out of sheer desperation, he drove down 4th Street toward the older district of the city. He remembered her mentioning, years ago, that her mother's old shop was sitting vacant, but he had dismissed it as a poor real estate investment. As his Audi pulled up to the curb, he saw a light shining through the large glass storefront of the old building. The sign above the door was gone, but through the glass, he saw a figure, standing on a stepladder, holding a paintbrush. She was wearing a pair of faded denim overalls, her hair tied back in a loose bun. Fiona. Nolan didn't even grab his umbrella. He threw his car door open and slammed it shut, striding across the wet pavement toward the shop. He pushed the front door open, the bell above it ringing with a high, clear chime. We're not open yet, Fiona started, turning around on the ladder with a wet paintbrush in her hand.
She stopped when she saw him.
Her face didn't register shock. It didn't register anger. There was no sudden intake of breath, no sudden rush of tears, no dramatic pause. Her eyes were completely clear, completely still, like a quiet pond after the ice is thawed. Nolan stood in the middle of the empty shop, dripping rainwater onto the freshly sanded floorboards. Fiona, he breathed out, his voice cracking slightly. I've been looking for you everywhere. Fiona stepped down from the ladder, set the paintbrush neatly across the top of the paint can, and wiped her hands on a rag. Mr. Keller, she said, her voice even. You are trespassing on private commercial property. If you're here regarding the legal settlement, you are required to speak through Mr. Harrison. Nolan flinched at the formal address. Mr. Keller? Fiona stopped this. I know you're hurt. I know I was preoccupied in Iceland. Becca's condition put me under a lot of stress and I didn't treat you right. He stepped closer to her, reaching out to take her hand. Come home. We can talk about this. I'll fire Sarah. I'll delete the request portal.
I'll take a
month off work. We can go back to Iceland, just the two of us.
No, Becca. No.
Business. Fiona looked down at his outstretched hand, then back up at his face. Nolan, she said softly. Did you bring your hearing aid today? Nolan paused, surprised by the question.
Yes.
Of course. Good, she said. Then listen very carefully because I am only going to say this once, and I won't be writing it down on a sticky note. She took a step back, putting space between them. I don't hate you, Fiona said. Hate requires energy, and I spent every ounce of energy I had trying to keep you warm while I froze to death in that rental apartment. I don't want an apology. I don't want a trip to Iceland. I don't want a month of your time. Then what do you want? Nolan's voice rose, desperate, panicking. The money? $6 million? I'll pay it. I'll transfer the funds today. Just come back. I want what is legally mine, so I can finish paying for the restoration of this shop, she said calmly. And then I want you to leave me alone for the rest of my life. Nolan stared at her, his chest heaving. Habit took over, a reflex built over 4 years of dealing with uncomfortable emotional truths. His hand reached up, involuntarily to his left ear, his fingers touching the small casing of his hearing aid, preparing to slide it out, to drown out her words, to force her into silence. Fiona saw the gesture. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Go ahead, she said softly. Take it out. Nolan's hand froze at his ear. Take it out, Nolan, she repeated, her tone entirely devoid of anger. Silence. Me again. Block my number. Reject my request. Do what you always do when the truth gets inconvenient. Nolan's hand dropped to his side as if burned. He looked at her, his eyes wide, realizing in that single moment the horrific reality of what he had done to her. For years, he had turned his disability into a weapon of emotional abuse. He had rendered her voiceless whenever she tried to love him. Fiona, please, he whispered, his eyes filling with tears.
I'm sorry.
I'm so
Sorry.
The 72 hours for your settlement response expires tomorrow at 5. Fiona said, turning her back to him and picking up her paintbrush once more. Please have your lawyers contact mine. Goodbye, Nolan. The fall of Nolan Keller was neither quiet nor slow. When a man builds his entire identity on the illusion of absolute control, the moment that control slips, everything built upon it crumbles like dry sand. Refusing to accept Fiona's terms, Nolan attempted to force his board to fight the injunction. But Mr. Harrison was relentless. Within 48 hours, the court issued a temporary freeze on Keller Systems' upcoming funding round, pending audit of the original founder equity documents. The story leaked to the tech press. Keller Systems stalled by unpaid seed investor. The venture capital firm funding the series be pulled out, citing reputational risk and governance concerns. Key corporate clients, worried about the legal instability, delayed their contract renewals. In the middle of the storm, Becca Holloway showed up at Nolan's corporate office. She didn't ask about his health or how he was sleeping. She didn't bring him lunch. She walked into his executive suite, dropped a stack of medical bills onto his desk, and asked if his company's private insurance would still cover her physical therapy treatments now that the funding had hit a snag. Nolan sat behind his massive oak desk, staring at her. Without the rose-tinted glass of Fiona's silent tolerance framing everything, Nolan saw Becca with horrifying clarity, a woman who had spent 4 years feeding on the residual warmth of another woman's relationship, taking everything and giving nothing in return. Becca, Nolan said softly. What? She asked, adjusting her designer handbag. I need to know if the billing department processed the claim, Nolan. My back has been really tight today because of all this drama. Get out, Nolan said. Becca blinked. What? Get out of my office. Get out of my apartment. Don't call me again. Nolan, how can you be so heartless after everything I've done for you? You did nothing for me, Nolan said, his voice flat dead. You just made sure I didn't notice I was throwing away the only person who actually cared if I lived or died. Becca's face transformed, her delicate, victimized mask dropping to reveal sharp, bitter indignation. She's not coming back to you, Nolan. Look at you. You're a mess. She ruined your company. She didn't ruin it, Nolan said, looking out the floor-to-ceiling window at the gray city skyline below. I did. 2 weeks later, the legal settlement was finalized. Nolan liquidated 25% of his personal equity shares at a fire sale discount to pay Fiona the $6.2 million.
He stepped
down as Chief Executive Officer of Keller Systems, taking a demotion to Chief Technology Officer under a new, board-appointed management team. The day the wire transfer cleared, Fiona stood inside her fully restored shop on 4th Street. The space was bright, warm, and smelled faintly of fresh pine and oil paints. On the wall hung her mother's painting of the coast, framed in rich, dark walnut. The front glass window bore new gold leaf lettering, coal art conservation and framing. Mr. Harrison walked through the door, carrying a manila folder. It's done, Fiona, he said, handing her the confirmation paper. The funds are in your account. The legal ties between you and Nolan Keller are completely severed. Fiona looked at the paper for a moment, then set it aside without reading the numbers. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for everything. What are you going to do now? He asked kindly. Fiona looked around her shop, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the warm air. I'm going to work, she said with a gentle smile. And then I'm going to take a trip. 6 months later, the Tromsø sky in Norway was black as velvet, sprinkled with millions of sharp, brilliant stars. Fiona stood on the snow-covered ridge, wearing a heavy, thermal down coat and insulated boots. Beside her, a small group of international photographers and travelers chatted quietly in hushed, respectful tones. There was no rush, no 3-hour advance request, no 5-minute timer counting
down.
No one complaining about a bad back or a hurt wrist. No one taking out a hearing aid to block out her excitement. Suddenly, the night sky shifted. A wave of ethereal, glowing emerald light broke across the horizon, swirling slowly into deep violet and brilliant rose pink. It cascaded over the snow-covered mountains, dancing across the heavens in a silent, breathtaking symphony of sheer light. Fiona stood still, her breath misting in the cold Arctic air. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and captured a single, stunning photograph of the sky. Then, she opened her digital journal and wrote a single line beneath the picture. Request number 100. See the world with my own eyes. Status: approved by me. She smiled, tucked her phone back into her pocket, and tilted her head up toward the sky, letting the cold, brilliant light bathe her face in pure, undisturbed warmth. 3,000 miles away, in a quiet, dimly lit apartment overlooking a rain-slick city, Nolan Keller sat alone at an empty dining table. The apartment was silent. No music played. No television hummed. On the table in front of him sat a small, velvet-lined box containing his hearing aid. He had taken it out hours ago. He used to think the silence was a sanctuary, a private fortress where no one could demand his time, no one could bother him with emotional burdens, no one
Could disrupt his work.
now, sitting in the dark, surrounded by the vast, empty rooms of a home that had never truly been a home, Nolan finally understood the truth. The silence wasn't a fortress. It was a prison he had built with his own hands. And inside it, there was no one left to hear him scream.